Orphan runs away and finds a hidden house under the vines. But what he sees inside shocks. Ethan Carter, just 8 years old, was once again being returned to the children's home after a failed adoption attempt. The family that had taken him in for 3 months decided he was too rebellious and difficult to handle. It was the 5th time this had happened in 2 years. The boy couldn't stand hearing the same excuses anymore. That he was troubled, that he couldn't adjust, that maybe it was better to wait for a more experienced family. So when the social worker stepped out to handle paperwork, Ethan grabbed his backpack and escaped through the bathroom window of the home. His small, bare feet ran across the hot asphalt until he was completely lost in the streets of Springfield, in the interior of Illinois. The sun was strong that March afternoon, and his red t-shirt was already sticking to his sweaty body. His camouflage shorts, the only clothes he really liked, were frayed at the hem from so much wear. Ethan had no destination. He just wanted to disappear, to stay away from adults who promised love and then changed their minds. He walked through the town's streets until he reached the rural outskirts, where the houses became more sparse and the vegetation denser. Hours later, his stomach growling and his feet sore, he spotted something that made him stop. In the middle of a seemingly abandoned lot, there was a structure completely covered by climbing plants and moss. It was as if nature had decided to swallow that house, hiding it from the rest of the world. Curiosity overcame exhaustion. Ethan approached slowly, stepping carefully between the loose stones of the arid lot. The vegetation covering the structure was thick, forming a sort of green dome that barely let on. There were walls underneath. When he was just a few meters from the entrance, he heard low voices coming from inside. His heart raced. He shouldn't be there. But something kept him from leaving. Hidden behind some bushes, he managed to locate a window where the vegetation was less dense. Very carefully, he approached and looked through the dusty glass. What he saw left him frozen in surprise. Inside the house, an elderly man with graying hair held a photograph in his trembling hands. His tears dripped onto the paper as he murmured something inaudible. Beside him, a woman of about 60 was delicately stroking a small t-shirt, also red, almost identical to the one Ethan was wearing. "My boy. My dear boy," whispered the woman, hugging the little garment to her chest. The man lifted his eyes from the photo and touched his wife's face tenderly. "Margaret, you need to stop torturing us like this. It's been 5 years." "I know, Richard. But today is his birthday. He would be 13 today." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Those people had lost a son. And from their reaction to the t-shirt, it must have been a boy around his age when it happened. Without realizing it, he leaned in further to get a better look inside the house. The dry branch he was leaning on snapped with a loud crack. The noise echoed in the afternoon silence, and the voices inside the house stopped immediately. "Did you hear that?" asked Richard, rising from his armchair. "Must be some animal," replied Margaret, but her voice trembled slightly. Ethan tried to run, but his bare feet slipped on the loose stones. He fell, hitting his knee hard on the rocky ground. The pain was intense, and an involuntary groan escaped his lips. The door of the house opened with a creak. Richard appeared first, tall and thin, his brown eyes scanning the lot. Close behind him came Margaret, a woman of medium height, graying hair pulled into a low bun, wearing a simple blue dress. "Who's there?" shouted Richard, his voice firm but careful. Ethan was crouched behind a larger rock, holding his injured knee. He knew he had been discovered, but fear paralyzed him. What if those people were dangerous? What if they meant him harm? "Richard, look over there," Margaret pointed toward where the boy was hiding. With cautious steps, the couple approached. When they rounded the rock, they found Ethan curled up, trembling not just from fear, but also from hunger and exhaustion. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Margaret, bringing her hand to her chest. "It's a child!" Richard crouched down slowly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten the boy further. "Hey there, little one. Are you hurt?" Ethan looked up, still wary. The man had a kind face, despite the wrinkles of worry around his eyes. "I won't hurt you," continued Richard in a soft voice. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied in a voice barely audible. "Ethan is a lovely name," said Margaret, moving closer as well. My name is Margaret, and this is my husband Richard. Are you lost? The boy merely nodded his head, still clutching his knee. Are you hungry? Asked the woman, noticing Ethan's visible thinness. Again he nodded, this time more eagerly. Margaret turned to her husband, and they exchanged a meaningful look. Richard hesitated, but she had already made her decision. Let's get you inside, take care of that injury, and find you something to eat. Margaret, began Richard, but she cut him off with a determined look. The boy is hurt and hungry, Richard. We're not leaving him out here like this. Carefully they helped Ethan to his feet. He limped a little, but he could walk. Together they headed toward the entrance of the hidden house. As he crossed the threshold, Ethan's jaw dropped. The interior of the house was impeccably clean and tidy, but it was like stepping into a museum dedicated to a child. There were toys neatly arranged on shelves, small clothes folded in baskets, drawings taped to the kitchen wall. Sit here at the table, said Margaret, pulling out a chair. Let me take care of that knee first. While she fetched the first aid kit, Ethan observed everything around him with curiosity and a certain unease. It was obvious this house had been a home to a child, but where was that child now? Richard remained standing near the door, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. His eyes went from Ethan to his wife, as if waging an internal battle. Where are you from, boy? He asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan hesitated. Telling the truth meant they would call the children's home and he would be sent back. I got lost, he said simply. Margaret returned with a bowl of warm water, cotton balls, and a small bottle of antiseptic. This might sting a little, she warned, beginning to clean the wound. Ethan bit his lower lip but didn't complain. He was used to pain. Do you live far from here? Your parents must be worried, the woman said as she placed a bandage on his knee. I don't have parents, Ethan replied quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment. Margaret stopped what she was doing and exchanged another look with her husband. Who do you live with then? No one. Ethan averted his gaze, focusing on a colorful drawing on the wall. It was a picture of a happy family, clearly drawn by a child. Richard moved closer to the table, his expression more serious. Son, you need to tell us the truth. Where did you come from? Is someone looking for you? Before Ethan could answer, his stomach growled loudly, breaking the tension of the moment. First, let's feed you, decided Margaret, standing up quickly. Then we'll talk. She moved around the kitchen efficiently, taking leftovers from a pot of beans, reheating rice and frying an egg. The smell of food made Ethan's stomach rumble even louder. When was the last time you ate? Asked Richard, sitting down at the table. Yesterday morning, the boy admitted. Yesterday? Margaret turned around, shocked. My son, you went more than a day without eating. The word son echoed strangely in the kitchen. Everyone noticed, but no one commented. She placed the steaming plate in front of Ethan, who attacked the food with desperate hunger. Margaret also served a large glass of guava juice and watched satisfied as he ate. Slowly, dear, she said softly. The food isn't going to run away. Richard remained tense, looking out the window as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Margaret, we need to think about what we're going to do. We can't just what? She interrupted him, her cheeks flushed with indignation. Let a child go hungry? Send him away hurt and alone? That's not it, and you know it. But if he ran away from somewhere? I didn't run away from anywhere, lied Ethan, without lifting his eyes from the plate. It was a technical lie. He really had run away, but from the children's home, not from a family. In fact, he had no family to run away from. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. After eating, Ethan felt much stronger, but also sleepier. The day had been long and traumatic, and the warmth of the house combined with a full stomach made his eyes heavy. Margaret noticed. You're tired, aren't you? Why don't you rest a little? Margaret, Richard pulled her aside. We don't know anything about this boy. What if his parents are desperately looking for him? What if the police show up here? Look at him, Richard, she whispered back, discreetly pointing at Ethan, who was struggling to keep his eyes open. Look at the state he was in when we found him. Thin, hurt, alone. This isn't a child who simply got lost playing. Even so, we can't what? Show compassion? Help a child in need? The whispered argument was interrupted when Ethan literally dozed off sitting in the chair, his head lolling to the side. Margaret sighed. At least for today. Tomorrow we'll think about what to do. Richard knew it was useless to argue when his wife made a decision like that. In over 30 years of marriage, he had learned to recognize that tone of voice. Just for today, he agreed reluctantly. Margaret picked Ethan up with surprising ease. The boy was lighter than he should be for his age. Come on, dear, let's put you to bed. She took him to a small but cozy room. The bed had clean, sweet-smelling sheets, and there were more toys neatly arranged on shelves. On the bedside table, a small teddy bear waited patiently. Ethan opened his eyes when he was placed on the bed. "Whose room is this?" he asked sleepily. Margaret hesitated for a moment, smoothing the sheet over him. "It was our son's," she said simply. "Where is he?" "He isn't with us anymore." Ethan was smart for his age. He understood that "isn't with us anymore" meant something bad had happened, but he didn't press for details. "Can I really sleep here?" "Yes, you can. Sleep well." She left the door ajar and a small light on in the hallway. In the next room, she heard Richard pacing back and forth, clearly agitated. "I know what you're thinking," she said when she entered their own room. "Do you really?" Richard stopped pacing and stared at her. "Then you know this is dangerous for us and for him too. The boy needs help. And we are not the right people to give that help, Margaret. Look at us. Look at this house. We've barely been able to take care of ourselves these last few years." It was true, and they both knew it. After they lost Daniel, they had shut themselves off from the world. The house had been intentionally hidden, covered by the vegetation they themselves had planted and cultivated to protect themselves from visitors and painful memories. "Maybe that's exactly why he found his way to us," Margaret said softly. "Maybe we need to care for someone again. Or maybe you're seeing things that aren't there because you miss Daniel." The accusation stung, especially because there was a grain of truth in it. When Margaret first saw Ethan, her heart raced. The boy was the same age Daniel was when they left, had the same hair color. Even the red t-shirt was similar. "This isn't about Daniel," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. Richard sat on the bed beside her and took her hands. "My love, I understand. I felt the same thing when I saw the boy. But we can't use a child to fill the hole our son left. It wouldn't be fair to him or to us." "What if it's not that? What if it's just the right thing to do?" They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the night wind made the tree leaves whisper, and from time to time the muffled sound of Ethan moving in bed could be heard. "Let's talk to him tomorrow morning," Richard decided. "Find out his real story, and then we'll see what to do." Margaret nodded, but deep in her heart she already knew what her decision would be, regardless of Ethan's story. During the night, she woke to the sound of crying from the next room. It was Ethan, having nightmares. Without a second thought, she got up and went to him. The boy was restless, talking in his sleep. "I don't want to go back. Please don't send me away. I'll be good." Margaret's heart broke. She sat on the edge of the bed and began to stroke his hair as she used to do with Daniel. "It's okay, dear," she whispered. "You're safe here." Gradually, Ethan calmed down and fell back into a peaceful sleep. Margaret stayed there for a few more minutes, watching his peaceful face in the dim light. In the next room, Richard had also woken to the sounds. He heard when his wife got up, heard her tender words to the boy, and he knew at that moment that regardless of his reservations, they wouldn't give Ethan up so easily. In the morning, the boy woke to the smell of homemade bread and coffee. For a moment he was confused, not remembering where he was. Then the memories of the previous day returned, and he felt relieved to still be in the hidden house. He got up slowly, testing his injured knee. It was much better, just a little tender. Leaving the room, he found Margaret in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She was wearing a flowery apron and humming softly. "Good morning, dear," she said when she saw him. "Did you sleep well?" Ethan nodded but looked around for Richard. He went to check on the plants in the backyard, Margaret explained, following his gaze. He always does that in the morning. Want to help set the table? It was the first time in a long time that someone had asked for Ethan's help instead of just tolerating him. He nodded enthusiastically and began arranging the plates and silverware. "You cook really well," he said, watching her scramble eggs. "Thank you. I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother. It's a recipe that's passed down through generations." "I don't know how to cook anything," Ethan admitted. "At the home, we're not allowed in the kitchen." The word home slipped out before he realized it. Margaret stopped stirring the eggs and turned to him. "Home?" Ethan realized his slip and turned red. I didn't mean to—" "Ethan," she approached and crouched to be at eye level with him. "You can tell me the truth. I promise we'll try to help." At that moment, Richard came in through the back door carrying a handful of ripe guavas. "Good morning," he said, but his expression was serious. "Margaret, we need to talk to the boy." Talk. They sat down at the breakfast table, but the atmosphere was tense. Ethan ate in silence, sensing he was about to receive bad news. "Ethan," began Richard, after everyone had finished eating, "we need to know the truth. Where did you come from? Why were you alone yesterday?" The boy played with the crumbs on his plate for a few moments before answering. "I live at a children's home in Springfield. I lived there. I ran away yesterday." "Why did you run away?" asked Margaret gently. "Because I got tired of being returned." "Returned?" "Yeah." Ethan looked up, and they saw a deep sadness that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old child. "People go there, say they want to adopt me, take me to their home for a while, and then decide they don't want me and return me. It's happened 5 times. The silence that followed was heavy. Margaret had tears in her eyes, and even Richard seemed shaken. "Why did they return you?" asked the woman. Ethan shrugged, trying to seem indifferent, but his voice betrayed the pain. "They say I'm rebellious, that I don't adjust, that I'm difficult. The last family said I had behavioral problems." "What kind of problems?" Richard wanted to know. "I don't like it when people yell at me, and I don't like it when they lie, and when someone promises something and doesn't keep it, I get angry." Margaret exchanged a look with her husband. To them, that seemed like normal behavior for a child who had suffered multiple rejections. "And now?" asked Richard. "What do you plan to do?" "I don't know," admitted Ethan. "I just know I don't want to go back to the children's home. I don't want to be returned again." "Ethan," said Margaret carefully, "the people at the children's home must be worried about you. They need to know you're safe." "They don't really care," he replied bitterly. "They only care because it's their job." Richard got up from the table and began pacing the kitchen, clearly agitated. "We need to call the children's home, or the police." "No!" Ethan jumped up, knocking over the chair. "Please, don't send me back. I promise I won't be a bother. I can help with the plants, I can clean, I can do anything." "Honey, it's not about you being a bother," said Margaret, trying to calm him. "Then why do you want to send me away?" Tears began to stream down Ethan's face. "Do you also think I'm problematic?" The question hit Margaret hard. She stood up and wrapped the boy in a tight hug. "No, honey, we don't think that. It's complicated." "Everything is always complicated." Ethan sobbed against her shoulder. "Why can't things be simple?" Richard stopped pacing and looked at the scene. His wife comforting an abandoned child, both crying, both clearly needing each other. He thought of the son they had lost, of promises unkept, of dreams undone. He thought of how they themselves had isolated themselves from the world, hiding behind walls of vegetation and memories. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe it was time to open up again. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay for now." Ethan pulled away from Margaret and looked at him with hope. "Really? Really? But we have to set some rules, and eventually we'll have to sort out your legal situation." "What kind of rules?" "Nothing too hard," said Margaret quickly. "Help with the house chores, be polite, always tell the truth. I can do that. And you have to promise us you won't run away from here," added Richard. "If something bothers you, if you want to leave, you talk to us first. Deal?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Deal." That morning, they began to establish a routine. Richard showed Ethan how to care for the plants that covered the house, explaining that some were to protect from the sun, others to attract birds, and others simply because they were beautiful. "Why did you hide the house like this?" asked the boy while watering a pot of fern. Richard hesitated before answering. "Sometimes, when we are sad, we want to hide from the world for a while. And you were sad because of your son?" "Yes, very sad." "What happened to him?" This time the hesitation was longer. Richard stopped pruning the dry leaves and looked at his hands. He got sick, an illness the doctors couldn't cure. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't a lie either. Daniel really had gotten sick, sick in heart, sick in soul, sick with a sadness that seemed to have no end. But the full truth was too complex for a child to understand. "Did you miss him a lot?" "We did. We still do." Ethan nodded as if he understood perfectly. "I miss my parents too, even though I never met them." It was a profound observation for such a young child. Richard looked at him with admiration. "How so?" "Everyone has parents, right? So I must have had them too. And sometimes I imagine what they were like, what it would be like if they had stayed with me. Then I miss something that never existed." Richard felt a lump in his throat. The innocent wisdom of that child touched him deeply. "That's very smart of you to realize that. Miss Susan from St. Michael's Children's Home said it's normal to miss parents you never knew. She said everyone needs a family." "And you? What do you think about that?" Ethan stopped watering the plants and thought about the question. "I think family isn't just who shares the same blood as you. Family is who truly cares about you, who doesn't abandon you when things get tough." Once again, Richard was impressed by the boy's maturity. "And how do you know when someone truly cares?" "By the small gestures," answered Ethan without hesitation. "Like Mrs. Margaret taking care of my hurt yesterday, or you teaching me about the plants. People who truly care do these things without expecting anything back." They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The sun was strong, but the dense vegetation created several shaded areas around the house. "Did your son like plants?" asked Ethan eventually. "Yes, he did. In fact, it was his idea to plant the vines on the house. He said it would be like having a tree house, only better." It was the first time Richard had spoken of Daniel naturally, without evident pain in his voice. Ethan noticed this and felt encouraged to ask more questions. "Was he older than me?" "A little older. He was 10 when he passed." "Did he like the same things I do?" Richard smiled slightly. "Some things, yes. He liked soccer, flying kites, helping in the vegetable garden, and he really liked asking questions just like you." "Can I see a picture of him?" The question took Richard by surprise. He didn't know how to answer. "Maybe later," he said finally, "when your Mrs. Margaret is with us." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. That same day, in the late afternoon, a neighbor appeared unexpectedly at the property. Mrs. Gladys lived about a kilometer away and rarely visited, especially after Richard and Margaret had isolated themselves. "Good afternoon," she shouted from the makeshift gate barely visible among the vegetation. "Is anyone there?" Richard and Ethan were in the backyard when they heard the voice. The man stiffened immediately. "Stay here," he whispered to the boy. "Don't show yourself." Ethan obeyed, hiding behind a large fern. Richard went to the gate, trying to appear natural. "Hi, Mrs. Gladys, how are you?" "I'm fine, Richard. It's been a while since I've seen you." "How is Margaret?" "She's well, thank you." Mrs. Gladys craned her neck, trying to see beyond the dense vegetation. "What a hidden little house you've made, huh? You can barely tell anyone lives here. It's how we like it. Look, I came here because I'm worried. Last night I saw a child walking around these parts, a little boy, all alone. You haven't seen anything, have you?" Richard's heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen a thing. How strange. I'm sure I saw him. I even thought about calling the police, but I decided to ask the neighbors first. The boy looked lost. Could have been someone's child visiting one of the houses further down." "Could be." Mrs. Gladys didn't seem entirely convinced. "Anyway, if you see anything strange, let me know, okay? A child alone out here isn't normal. Of course, if I see anything, I'll tell you. Let me just have a little look to see if he isn't hiding somewhere around here." Before Richard could protest, she was already pushing the gate open and entering the property. "Mrs. Gladys, I think that—" "Don't worry, I won't touch anything. I just want to make sure there isn't a lost child around here." She began walking across the grounds, pushing branches aside and looking behind trees. Richard followed her, nervous, praying that Ethan would remain well hidden. "My, how you've let this place turn into a jungle," she commented, wrestling with a hibiscus branch. "It didn't have all this vegetation before." "We like it this way. It's cooler." Mrs. Gladys continued her search, coming dangerously close to the fern where Ethan was hiding. The boy held his breath, curled up in the smallest space possible. "Richard! Mrs. Gladys!" Margaret's voice came from the house door. "What a nice surprise!" The distraction worked. Mrs. Gladys turned and headed toward the house, abandoning the search. "Hi, Margaret. How are you?" "Well, thank you. Come in. I'll make some coffee." "Thank you, dear, but I can't stay long. I came here because of a strange situation. While Mrs. Gladys told Margaret about the lost boy, Richard made discreet signals for Ethan to stay hidden. "How strange indeed," said Margaret, feigning surprise. "Are you sure it was a child?" "Absolutely. A tiny little boy. Must have been about 7, 8 years old. He was wearing a red t-shirt." Ethan instinctively looked down at his own t-shirt. It was exactly his description. "Well, I did think about calling the police," Mrs. Gladys continued, "but I decided to ask the neighbors first. A child alone on the street isn't normal." "It really isn't," agreed Margaret. "If we see anything, we'll let you know." "Thank you. Well, I'll be on my way then. I have to stop by Mrs. Dorothy's house too, to ask if she saw anything." After she left, Richard and Margaret looked at each other, worried. "Ethan," Margaret called softly. "You can come out. She's gone." The boy emerged from behind the fern, visibly nervous. "Was she looking for me?" "It seems so," admitted Richard. "She saw you last night." "Are you going to turn me over to her?" "No," said Margaret firmly. "But this means we have to be more careful. We can't let anyone see you for now." "For how long?" "Until we figure out what to do," replied Richard. That night, during dinner, they discussed the situation. "We can't keep the boy hidden forever," said Richard. "What if Mrs. Gladys really calls the police?" "She won't call," replied Margaret. "You know her. Likes gossip but doesn't like trouble. What if she comes back? What if she brings other people? Then we'll have to think of some explanation." Ethan ate in silence, listening to the conversation. Finally, he spoke. "I can leave if you're worried." "That's not it," said Margaret quickly. "Yes, it is. You're afraid of getting into trouble because of me." Richard sighed. "Ethan, it's not fear of trouble. It's that the situation is complicated. Legally, you should be at the children's home. If someone finds out you're here—" "I understand," the boy interrupted. "You can say you found me lost today, that I showed up here asking for food, and you were about to take me back to the home." It was a clever lie, and they all realized it. "Did you think of that yourself?" asked Margaret, impressed. "I learned to think fast at the home. When you have no one to protect you, you have to protect yourself." Once again, the sad wisdom of that child touched them deeply. "We won't lie," decided Richard, "but we also won't turn you in. For now, you stay here with us, and we'll see how things develop." Ethan smiled for the first time since he had arrived at the house. "Thank you. Just promise you'll be careful. Don't leave the house when people are around." "I promise." In the following days, they established a careful routine. Ethan helped with household chores very early in the morning, when it was least likely that neighbors would be around. In the afternoon, when the sun was very strong, he stayed inside reading Daniel's old books or helping Margaret with handiwork. It was during one of these afternoons that he asked the question they had been expecting. "Can I see Daniel's room?" Margaret stopped sewing and looked at Richard, who was fixing a broken chair. "Why do you want to see it?" he asked. "Just curious. You talk about him sometimes, but I don't know what he was really like." "The room is exactly as he left it," said Margaret hesitantly. "We haven't touched anything." "Can I just take a look? I promise I won't touch anything." Richard and Margaret exchanged glances. Neither of them had entered that room in 5 years. "All right," Margaret decided finally, "but I'll go with you." Daniel's room was at the end of the hallway, the door always closed. When Margaret opened it, a smell of must and still air escaped. It was a typical 10-year-old boy's room. An unmade bed as if he had just gotten up, a school backpack thrown on a chair, clothes on the floor. On the wall, posters of soccer players and a map of the United States full of colored pins. "He wanted to know every state in the country," explained Margaret, pointing to the map. Each pin was a place he wanted to visit. Ethan observed everything with respectful attention. On the study desk were open notebooks, scattered pencils, a half-finished science project. "Was he good in school?" he asked. "Very good, especially in geography and natural sciences." "Just like me," exclaimed Ethan, and then blushed at his own excitement. Margaret smiled. "You're good in school too?" "I was. At the home we study, but it's not the same. And when I stayed with families, sometimes I missed a lot of school because of the moves." On the shelf, there were several small soccer trophies and a class photo. "Is that him?" Ethan pointed to a dark-haired boy with a wide smile in the middle of the photo. "Yes, it is." Ethan studied the photo carefully. Daniel did look a bit like him, mainly in the shape of his face and the color of his eyes. He seemed nice. "He was very nice," said Margaret, her voice choked. "Cheerful, playful, always asking questions about everything." "Like me?" "Like you." They stood in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the atmosphere of the preserved room. "Do you miss him every day?" Ethan asked eventually. "Every day?" "That must be hard." "It is. But you know what's harder? It's knowing that we could have done things differently." Ethan looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Margaret realized she had said too much. That was dangerous territory, memories she and Richard preferred to keep buried. "It's complicated, dear. When someone we love is gone, we always think about what we could have done to change things. But sometimes there's nothing we can do, right? Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes bad things happen even when everyone did their best." It was a surprisingly mature observation for a child. Margaret looked at him with admiration. "Who taught you that?" "Life," Ethan answered simply. "At the children's home, you learn that it's not always someone's fault when things go wrong. Sometimes it's just bad luck." They left the room in silence, but something had changed. It was as if an emotional door had opened slightly. That night, during dinner, Richard asked an unexpected question. "Ethan, what do you want to be when you grow up?" The boy stopped eating and thought about the question. "No one has ever asked me that before." "What do you mean?" "At the children's home, you don't think much about the future. You just try to get through each day. And at the foster families' houses, I never stayed long enough for them to be interested in my plans." Richard felt bad for asking, but Ethan continued. "But if I could choose anything, I think I'd like to have a family. A real family. One that wouldn't send me back." "That's not a profession," said Margaret gently. "It's a dream." "Then my dream is to have a family, and my profession, I don't know. Maybe something that helps other kids like me." "What kind of help?" "I don't know. Maybe be a psychologist or work at a better children's home or help find good families for orphaned kids." It was an impressive life plan for an 8-year-old. "Why do you want to help other children?" asked Richard. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, and I know what it's like when someone is kind to you when you need it most. Like you are being with me now." Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. "You are a very special child, Ethan." "I'm not. I'm just a kid who went through bad things and learned some stuff along the way." After dinner, while Ethan was taking a bath, Richard and Margaret talked on the porch. "He's very smart," said Richard, "and too mature for his age." "That's what happens when a child has to grow up too fast." They watched the stars for a moment. "Richard," Margaret finally said, "I know you're afraid. I am too. But look what this boy has already done for us in just a few days." "What do you mean?" "You talked about Daniel today. We went into his room for the first time in 5 years. You're smiling again." It was true. Richard hadn't noticed, But since Ethan arrived, he felt lighter. "And you?" he asked. "I feel useful again. I feel like a mother again." "Margaret, I know what you're going to say. That he's not Daniel, that we can't use him to replace our son. And you're right. But we also can't deny that he needs us, and we need him." Richard sighed. "What are you proposing? That we consider the possibility of being a real family, the three of us. That would mean contacting the children's home, social workers, a whole legal process. It would mean coming out of hiding," said Margaret, "reconnecting with the world. Do you think we can do it? With Ethan here, I think we can do anything." The next morning, Ethan woke up with a strange feeling. For a moment, he couldn't identify what it was. Then he realized he felt safe. It was the first time in years he woke up without the constant anxiety of not knowing what the day would bring, whether it would be a good day or if someone would decide they didn't want him anymore. He got up excited and went to the kitchen, where he found Margaret making pancakes. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Very well. Can I help?" "Yes, you can. How about you mix the batter while I prepare the syrup?" They worked side by side, talking about trivial matters. Ethan told her about a dream he had about sailing in a boat made of leaves, and Margaret laughed genuinely for the first time in years. Richard appeared in the kitchen, drawn by the sound of the laughter. "What are you laughing about?" "Ethan had a very funny dream," explained Margaret. "Tell him," she encouraged the boy. As Ethan repeated the dream story, elaborating the details dramatically, Richard watched the scene. His wife was radiant, the boy was confident and happy, and the kitchen was full of life again. Perhaps Margaret was right. Perhaps it was time to try again. "Ethan," he said when the boy finished the story, "we need to talk about your future." The boy's expression closed off immediately. "Are you going to send me away?" "No," said Richard firmly. "Actually, we're thinking the opposite." "What do you mean?" Margaret sat at the table and pulled Ethan close. "How would you feel if we tried to adopt you officially?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "Really? Really? But I've been returned 5 times. What if you change your minds too?" "We won't change our minds," said Richard. "But we understand your worry. That's why we want to do everything properly, officially, so you feel safe." "What does that mean?" "It means we have to contact the children's home, explain the situation, go through a legal process," explained Margaret. "It might take a few months." "What if they don't allow it?" "Then we fight for you," said Richard determinedly. "The way real families do." Ethan began to cry, but they were tears of relief and happiness. "I really want to stay with you." "Then that's what we'll do," said Margaret, hugging him. "We'll be a real family." That same day, they decided to take the first step. Richard called the children's home. "Hello? I'd like to speak to someone responsible for a boy named Ethan Carter. One moment, please." After a few minutes on hold, a woman's voice answered. "This is Susan, a social worker. Do you have information about Ethan?" "I do. He's here with us." "You found him? Where? How is he?" "He's fine. He showed up here on our property a few days ago, lost and hungry. We've been taking care of him." "Thank God. We've been desperately looking for him. Can you bring him back today?" Richard looked at Ethan, who was listening to the conversation anxiously. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. My wife and I would like to know about the adoption process." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're interested in adopting Ethan?" "We are." "That's unexpected. Could you come here so we can talk in person, and bring the boy too, of course?" "We can come tomorrow morning." "Perfect. I'll schedule it with the coordinator. Can you give me your name and address?" After providing the information, Richard hung up the phone. "So?" asked Margaret nervously. "They want us to take Ethan tomorrow for a talk." "Will they force me to stay there?" asked the boy, frightened. "We don't know yet," admitted Richard, "but we're going to fight for you, remember? What if they say you're too old to adopt me?" It was a valid concern. Richard was 58 and Margaret 56. They weren't exactly young for first-time parents. "Then we'll show them that age is just a number," said Margaret, "that what matters is love and dedication." That night, they prepared for the meeting as if they were going into the most important battle of their lives. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Ethan woke up nervous. He put on his best clothes, a blue shirt that Margaret had washed and ironed especially for the occasion, and tried to comb his unruly hair. "It's going to be okay, dear," said Margaret, adjusting his tie. "We'll be with you the whole time." "What if Miss Susan asks why I ran away?" "You tell the truth," advised Richard. "Always tell the truth." The trip to Springfield was tense. Ethan stayed quiet in the back seat of Richard's old car, watching the familiar landscape with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. St. Michael's Children's Home was a two-story building, painted light yellow, with a small playground in front. There were several children playing when they arrived, and some waved at Ethan. "Ethan!" shouted a girl of about 6, running to the fence. "You came back?" "Hi, Emma," he replied timidly. "Miss Susan said you ran away." Everyone was worried. Other boys approached the fence, all talking at once, wanting to know where he was, if he was okay, if he was staying. "Everyone," said a firm voice behind them. "Leave Ethan alone. He needs to sort some things out first." It was Susan, a woman in her 40s, curly hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a white lab coat over a pink blouse. "Ethan," she said with a relieved smile, "it's good to see you're okay, and you must be the couple who called yesterday." "Richard Carter," he said, extending his hand, "and this is my wife, Margaret." "Nice to meet you. Shall we talk in my office?" Susan's office was small but cozy, with children's drawings taped to the walls and a large shelf full of files. "First, Ethan," she said, sitting behind the desk, "do you want to tell me where you've been these past few days?" Ethan looked at Richard and Margaret, who encouraged him with a nod. "I ran away from here and got lost. I was very hungry and thirsty when I arrived at their house. They helped me." "Why did you run away?" "Because I was tired of being sent back. I didn't want it to happen again." Susan nodded understandingly. "I understand your frustration. I know you've been through difficult situations." "And now?" asked Margaret. "What's the procedure?" "Well, first I need to understand your situation. Mr. Richard mentioned interest in adoption. Is this serious?" "Very serious," replied Richard. "Do you have experience with children? Children of your own?" There was a moment of hesitation. "We had a son," said Margaret quietly. "He passed away 5 years ago." "I'm so sorry," said Susan genuinely. "And do you believe you are emotionally ready to adopt another child?" "We believe we are," replied Richard. "Ethan showed us that." "How so?" "He helped us start living again," explained Margaret. "For the last 5 years we shut ourselves off from the world, living only on memories. Ethan brought us back to life." Susan took some notes. "And you, Ethan? How do you feel about this?" "I feel safe with them," replied the boy. "For the first time I feel like I have a real family. But you've only been with them a few days, how can you be sure? Because they've treated me like a son from day one, not like a test or like a favor they're doing. They really care about me." Susan looked at the three of them, observing the dynamic between them. It was obvious there was a genuine connection. "Well," she said finally, "if you are serious about this, we need to start the formal process. There will be home visits, psychological evaluations, background checks, a preparatory course." "How long does it take?" asked Margaret. "Usually between 6 months and a year." "And during that time?" Richard wanted to know. "During that time, Ethan needs to stay at the children's home." "No," exclaimed the boy. "I don't want to stay here." "Ethan," said Susan patiently, "I understand, but those are the rules. I can't place you with people who haven't completed the qualification process yet." "But they are good people. They took care of me. I'm not questioning that. But there are legal procedures that must be followed." Ethan began to cry, and Margaret pulled him close. "It's not forever," she whispered. "It's only until we get the documentation." "What if you give up during the process?" he asked through tears. "We won't give up," Richard promised firmly. Susan observed the scene with interest. It was rare to see such a strong connection between prospective adoptive parents and a child, especially considering the short time they had known each other. "Perhaps we can make an arrangement," she said eventually. Everyone turned to her, hopeful. You can apply to be a temporary foster family while the adoption process runs its course. That would allow Ethan to stay with you, but with regular supervision. What does that mean? Asked Richard. It means I would make monthly visits. You would need regular medical and school reports, and Ethan would have to continue psychological counseling. We agree, said Margaret immediately. Ethan, asked Susan, what do you think? I think so. Anything is better than staying here waiting. Very well, I'll prepare the paperwork for temporary foster care. But I want to be clear. If during the process I identify any problems, Ethan returns to the children's home immediately. His well-being is my priority. We understand, said Richard, and we agree completely. Great. You can take Ethan back today, but I need to make a home visit next week. When they left the children's home, Ethan was beaming. In the car, he wouldn't stop talking about how excited he was to go back home. It's funny, he said at one point. What? Asked Margaret. I spent 8 years of my life looking for a home, and when I found you, it was like I always knew that was where I was headed. Richard looked in the rearview mirror and saw the boy smiling in the back seat, watching the scenery through the window, with an expression of contentment he had never seen before. We feel the same way, he said. Like you've always been part of our family. The following week they prepared intensively for Susan's visit. Ethan helped clean and organize the house, and they removed some of the vegetation covering the facade to make it look more approachable. The house is very hidden, observed Margaret. Susan will think it's strange. Maybe it's time to open it up a bit, said Richard. Let some light in. Can I help cut some plants? Offered Ethan. You can, but let's be careful. Some of them have sentimental value. They spent the whole morning pruning and organizing, gradually revealing the original structure of the house. When they finished, the difference was dramatic. The house was still embraced by nature, but now in a more harmonious way, less like a hideout and more like a home integrated with the environment. It looks beautiful, said Ethan, admiring the result. It looks more like the house our son imagined, agreed Richard. Do you think he would be happy if he saw me here? It was a complicated question. Richard and Margaret looked at each other before answering. I think so, said Margaret finally. Daniel always wanted a brother. He would be happy to know we are no longer alone. On the day of Susan's visit, Ethan was nervous but confident. He had mentally rehearsed all the questions she might ask and all the good things he could say about his new family. Susan arrived promptly at 2 in the afternoon, driving a small white car. She wore casual clothes and carried a large folder full of documents. My goodness, she exclaimed upon seeing the house. Did you do some remodeling? We just cleaned up a bit, said Richard modestly. That's very nice. May I see the house? They gave her a full tour from the cozy kitchen to the room that Ethan now called his own. Susan asked questions about routine, education, health, and safety. And the room that was your son's? She asked as they passed the closed door in the hallway. We keep it closed, said Margaret. May I see it? Richard hesitated, but opened the door. Daniel's room was exactly as they had found it on that sad day 5 years ago. You haven't touched a thing, observed Susan. We couldn't. And now? With Ethan here? Now it's easier, admitted Margaret. Ethan helped us accept that Daniel is gone, but that the love we had for him doesn't have to die too. That's very healthy, said Susan, taking notes. During the interview with Ethan, she asked how he felt in the new house, if there were clear rules, if he was afraid of anything. The only thing I'm afraid of is having to leave, he answered honestly. Why do you think that might happen? Because it always happened before. But now it's different. Now it's different because they really love me. They aren't trying to love me or pretending to love me. They really love me. How do you know? Because when I do something wrong, they talk to me instead of yelling. Because they ask my opinion about things in the house. Because Mr. Richard teaches me things that only fathers teach their sons. And because Mrs. Margaret worries about me the way only mothers worry. Susan was impressed by the maturity of the answer. And do you feel safe here? I feel at home. At the end of the visit, Susan spoke privately with Richard and Margaret. I'll be honest with you, she said. When you called, I was concerned. Late adoption is always complicated, and your age was a concern. but seeing you together—" "And?" asked Margaret anxiously. "It's obvious you are a family. The transformation in Ethan is remarkable. He is more confident, happier, more emotionally stable. Does that mean—" "It means I will give a positive recommendation for the foster placement, and I will expedite the adoption qualification process as much as possible." Richard and Margaret hugged, relieved. "There is just one condition," continued Susan. "Ethan needs to return to school. Education is mandatory." "Of course," agreed Richard. "We were already thinking about that. And I want you to consider family therapy, not because anything is wrong, but because you are building a family under unique circumstances. A professional can help with the transition." "If you think it's important, we'll do it," said Margaret. After Susan left, they sat on the porch to watch the sunset. Ethan was between them on the floor, playing with a puzzle. "Do you think it will work out?" Margaret asked quietly. "I think it already has worked out," replied Richard, watching Ethan focused on the toy. "The rest is just paperwork." At school, Ethan adapted quickly. His teacher, Mrs. Helen, a woman of about 50 with huge, colourful glasses, was delighted with the boy's intelligence and manners. "He is very well cared for," she commented to Margaret during a meeting. "You can tell he lives in a home full of love." Ethan made friends easily, and his report cards were always excellent. But the most important thing was that he was happy. Every day he would run home eager to share the day's news with his parents. Yes, parents, because that's how he referred to Richard and Margaret now, and they didn't correct him. One day, 3 months after Ethan's arrival, Mrs. Gladys appeared at the property again. This time she wasn't alone. She brought a younger woman who introduced herself as a Child Protective Services worker. "Good afternoon," said the worker. "We received an anonymous complaint that you are illegally sheltering a child." Richard remained calm. "It's not illegal. We are a registered foster family. Would you like to see the documents?" The worker looked surprised. "You have official authorization?" "We do, and we are in the adoption process." Richard went to get the papers, while Mrs. Gladys looked clearly embarrassed. I didn't know," she stammered. "I thought that—" "You thought we had kidnapped a child?" asked Margaret, unable to hide her irritation. "That's not it. It's just that you lived so isolated, and suddenly a child appears." "The child in question has a name," said Ethan, appearing in the doorway. "My name is Ethan Carter." He had added the family surname on his own. "Hi, sweetheart," said Margaret, putting her arm around his shoulders. "How was school today?" "Cool. Mrs. Helen said I'm among the best students in the class." The Child Protective Services worker checked the documents and confirmed everything was in order. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she said. "We are required to investigate all complaints." "I understand," said Richard. "You're just doing your job." After they left, Ethan asked, "Why did Mrs. Gladys do that?" "Because some people have a hard time accepting change," explained Margaret. "She's used to seeing us as a sad, isolated couple. Seeing our happy family confuses her." "Is she jealous?" "Perhaps a little." "I feel sorry for her," said Ethan thoughtfully. "It must be sad to live trying to spoil other people's happiness." Once again, his wisdom surprised the adults. 6 months after Ethan's arrival, Susan paid a special visit. "I have good news," she announced with a wide smile. "Your adoption certification has been approved. Now it's just a matter of waiting for the final court hearing." "How much longer?" asked Ethan eagerly. "At most 2 months." That night, they celebrated with a cake that Margaret had made especially for the occasion. It was a simple chocolate cake, but to Ethan it was the most delicious in the world because it had been made with maternal love. "Can I make a request?" the boy said as they ate. "Of course," replied Richard. "When the adoption is finalized, can you take me to visit Daniel's grave? I want to thank him." "Thank him for what?" asked Margaret, confused. "For taking care of you until I arrived, and for leaving a space in his family for me." Margaret began to cry, but they were tears of happiness. "Of course we can, my son." The final hearing took place on a sunny October morning. The courthouse was full of families waiting for similar procedures, but to Richard, Margaret, and Ethan, it was as if they were the only people in the world. The judge, a man of about 60 with reading glasses, carefully reviewed all the documents. "Ethan Carter," he said finally, "do you wish to be adopted by this family?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Why?" "Because they love me, and I love them. And because we complete each other." "And you?" the judge asked Richard and Margaret. "Are you certain you wish to assume full responsibility for this child?" "Absolutely certain," replied Richard. "He is already our son in our hearts," added Margaret. "Now, we want it to be on paper too." The judge smiled. "Then, by the powers vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby officially declare the adoption of Ethan Carter by Richard Carter and Margaret Hayes Carter. Congratulations, family." The gavel struck the table, and Ethan officially became Ethan Carter. They hugged right there in the middle of the courthouse, crying with happiness. It was the end of one journey and the beginning of another. On the way out, Susan was waiting for them. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Complete," Ethan answered without hesitation. "And do you plan to make any changes now that the adoption is official?" "Just one," said Richard. "What is it?" "We're going to open the house completely. We want our neighbors to meet our family." In the following months, the hidden house became the heart of the small rural community. Richard and Margaret reconnected with old friends, Ethan brought classmates from school to play, and they began hosting other families for Sunday lunches. Even Mrs. Gladys became a frequent visitor, fascinated by the transformation of the family she had once tried to report. "I've never seen such a big change," she remarked one day, watching Ethan teach soccer tricks to younger kids. "You're unrecognizable." "Love does that to people," Margaret said simply. 1 year after the adoption, they decided to throw a double birthday party, Ethan's 9th birthday and the 1-year birthday of the official family. They invited half the world, schoolmates, teachers, neighbors, staff from St. Michael's Children's Home, even the judge who had finalized the adoption. The party was in the backyard of the house, among the trees and plants that now grew harmoniously, instead of hiding the family from the world. During the party, Ethan gave a speech that moved everyone present. "1 year ago, I was a lost boy who had no family. Today I know that family isn't just who you're born with. Family is who chooses to stay together, who loves you on good days and bad, who never gives up on each other." He looked at Richard and Margaret. "Thank you for choosing me, thank you for never giving up on me, and thank you for teaching me that everyone deserves a family." When everyone had left and they were cleaning up the party remains, Ethan made an observation that would be forever etched in his parents' memory. "You know what's funny?" he said, picking up plastic cups. "I spent 8 years looking for a family, but you spent 5 years hiding from it. And when we stopped looking and hiding, we found each other." It was true. None of them had planned that meeting, that family, that happiness. But sometimes the best things in life happen when we least expect them. 2 years later, the house that was once hidden under vegetation became known throughout the region as the Happy Family House. People would pass by just to see the property where a family had reconnected with life. Ethan, now 11, was a confident and cheerful boy. His grades at school remained excellent, and he had discovered a passion for gardening, tending a special vegetable patch he'd planted, in honor of the brother he never knew. Richard and Margaret were aging with grace and happiness, surrounded by a love they thought they'd never have again in life. And on the kitchen wall next to Ethan's drawings was still the last photo they had taken of Daniel. But now, instead of being a symbol of pain, it was part of a larger story about how love never truly dies. It just transforms and finds new ways to bloom. That Christmas, Ethan asked his parents for just one gift. "Can you tell me more stories about Daniel? I want to know my brother better." And so on December nights, the family would gather on the porch to share memories, tears, and laughter, building bridges between the past and the present, between longing and hope. The house was no longer hidden, the family no longer lived in the past, and Ethan finally had what he had always dreamed of, a place where he belonged, where he was loved unconditionally, where he could grow and become the best version of himself. It was a story of new beginnings, of second chances, of how destiny sometimes conspires to put the right people in the right places at the right time. And every time Ethan passed by the spot where he had first seen the vine-covered house, he said a small prayer of gratitude for having had the courage to approach, to look through the window, to trust two strangers who became his family. Because sometimes the best discoveries are hidden right in front of us, waiting only for us to have the courage to come closer. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story of Ethan, Richard, and Margaret. Do you believe love can truly heal the deepest wounds of the heart? Leave your honest opinion in the comments and share with us your own experiences about family and second chances. Thank you so much for your company on this journey. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.